Hi everybody, I hope you're being good for my sub. I didn't want to miss out on a day of notes, so lucky you, we're going to do notes via video. So this is chapter 5.3 in your binders. You should already have the notes page for this lesson. It looks just like the one that's on the board. It should be the second or third page in your binder. Okay, so make sure, follow along, fill in your notes. If I go too fast, just hit the pause button and then you can hit it play again and keep up with your notes. When you're done, there is a little short review assignment that looks like this, okay? And then you're going to work on this by yourselves, okay, independently. I don't mind if you listen to music, but you need to make sure that you get this assignment done before you leave, okay? So it's got a few prayers, it's got a little highlight the main idea. It's a paragraph from your book, so you're going to highlight the main idea on that, and then you will do a little timeline, a sequencing thing, a matching with important people, and then at the very bottom you're going to be telling me who the new immigrants were and where they came from. Okay, remember I said to ask your folks, ask somebody you live with where your family came from. Okay, so if you can find that information out, that'd be fun to know. Alright, so chapter 5.3 notes. Go ahead and get something to write with, and we'll get these going. Okay, so new immigrants came to America at the turn of the 20th century. So date-wise, we're looking 1864-ish, post-Civil War to the early 1900s. Okay, so up to 1920. Alright, so when new immigrants came to America, there were two groups. The first group, we called them old immigrants. They came from North and Western Europe and China. This is like 1800, 1880s. Okay, so it's the beginning of the 1800s. So on your notes, you're going to put old immigrants. The second group that came, obviously we call them new immigrants. These were from South and Eastern Europe. So think like more Ireland, Germany, that era, instead of like China. Think farther west into Europe and the northern part. So this is going to be the lower part. Italy, okay? This group is new immigrants. Okay? And all of these immigrants came to a place called Ellis Island. It's in New York. It was a building that processed all these new immigrants that came to our country. Okay, Ellis Island. Once we get done with the notes and the quiz for chapter 5, we'll be able to read a book, and it's all about an immigrant who came to the United States via Ellis Island. So I think you'll really enjoy it. It's a really good book. Okay, now when immigrants came to the United States, they weren't greeted with cheers and applause, okay? So a lot of the nativists, or people who were already living here, they saw these immigrants as a threat to their jobs, and because of that, they weren't always very nice to them, so they required them to take a literacy test. Now, imagine if you are from Italy and you speak Italian. You don't speak a word of English. So now you're coming into a country where you know no one, you probably don't have very much money, and you can't read English. And they hand you an English test and say, here, you have to pass this if you want to come in. You've already spent all the money you have coming over on a boat, and the boat took months to come here. Okay, so it was very, very stressful times for these people who are coming to America, trying to find a new life, trying to get away from poverty. So it was, there was a lot of issues that were happening on Ellis Island to these immigrants. They did teach immigrants the American way of life. So a lot of these immigrants were forced to ignore or forget their traditions that they did in their home country. Here they were taught the American way of life, and we call that Americanization. Time out. Yes. So, here, you could fill in the 1, fill in the 7, fill in the 0, okay, just with your ID number, okay? I'm not even super concerned with this, you can skip the ID part if you want to just start between. Okay? Okay, so, urban life in America. Urban means city, okay, so they're talking about the different ways that the cities changed. The one big thing was buildings got way taller. Okay, think downtown Decatur. Think about the types of buildings that you see there. Now, think about the types of buildings that are in Eisenhower's neighborhood. Okay, a lot of homes, and you find many homes that are more than 2 stories, not really, but these buildings in these bigger cities got taller. Okay, they were running out of room to go this way, so they started building them up. Okay, people worried that cities would lose their green space. When they say green space, they mean like parks. Okay, so Decatur is notorious. We have a lot of parks because people worried about losing that green space or the grass. So landscapers built cities with parks. Okay, one big park was Central Park in New York City. You've probably seen it, pictures of it, videos, things like that. Central Park is a giant park, and it's in the very center of New York City. So it's one of the giant cities in our country. In addition to the green spaces, there were different classes of people as far as their money went. Okay, so when you see about classes, generally it has something to do with how much money they make. Okay, so the first group was the wealthy group. And these groups made money through industry and businesses, and they showed off their money by having really fancy houses. So when they say they made their money through industry or business, maybe they owned a factory that created something, or maybe they managed a business that was doing very well. And then as they started to make more and more money, they bought fancier and fancier homes. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and scroll this up, so let me erase. Hit pause if I go too fast. Oh. Okay, so we talked about the wealthy group that made more money through businesses. The next group was the middle class. Oop, that pen is not very good. This group was like corporate employees, so the people who worked for the wealthy ones. Teachers, lawyers, doctors, okay, so some of those career positions. These people were considered middle class, and standards were set for their occupations. Occupation is a fancy way of saying their job. Now, the last group was the working class. Okay, this group lived in poverty and in tenements. They didn't have clean running water or healthy living arrangements. A tenement is like a really nasty apartment. Okay, so it's like, I would say it's worse than, no apartments today. Even no matter where you live today, the apartments aren't quite as bad as they were back then. Tenements generally didn't have toilets, running water. Do you remember when we did way back, we talked about the big tall apartment buildings and people would go to the bathroom in a bucket and then dump it out the window, and that's why men wore the large brim hat? Okay, same kind of idea for tenements. There was no standards as to, there were limited standards on how the building could be run, as far as lighting, water, number of people per apartment or per building. And there were the healthy living arrangements, meaning they were dirty, okay, they were gross. The settlement house movement, this provided English and job classes and social activities to immigrants. So they would teach them, you know how like we have ECE class here, we teach you skills that you need in order to get a job as when you're older. Okay, same kind of classes that they taught to these immigrants. They also helped them learn English. Some of them maybe knew the very, very basics, but they let them learn a little bit more in English. And they provided social activities. So think about a club. If you have, we have different clubs here at school, like the gaming club, they get together and they play games. It's a social activity. So they provided social activities for these immigrants. Now, generally, they would stay like by neighborhood. So like there was usually like an Italian neighborhood. So they would provide Italian activities or things that they were comfortable with. There might be like an Irish area, different things like that. Okay. Of course, there's always scandal. There's always drama in history. There was a scandal in the government at this time. And there was a scheme set up to send Federal Railroad money to stockholders, which included members of Congress and the Vice President, which was a big no-no. Railroad money. Congress. Okay, this, if it was the the president, would be, I mean, that'd be grounds for impeachment. Okay, so that was the big scandal at the time. They also had some farmers' reform movement. So reform means change. So some different things that they changed. They had the Interstate Commerce Act of 1887, which called for reasonable railroad rates so farmers could afford to ship their crops to market. So just like if you were going to ship a package via UPS, you would pay UPS however much, and then they would ship your package for you. Farmers had to ship their crops to make money. Okay, so they'd put it on the train, and then they would take it to different places, and then they would get paid for selling their corn or whatever they grew. Different places were charging people too much. So just like if you went to the store and you bought a Coke and it was $1.25, okay, stores have to regulate how much money things that are about the same cost. So one store is not going to charge you $1, whereas another store is going to charge you $20. It's all going to be $1.25, $1.50, $2 range. Okay, same concept for this with the Interstate Commerce Act. Pause if you don't have it all written down, okay? Okay, so silver and gold. Farmers wanted paper money backed by silver and gold. So when you go and you put your money in the bank, at this time, there was like literally a piece of gold sitting there that backed it up. So if you ever wanted to trade out your money or get your money back, then they would hand you out of the bucket. Okay, it's not like that now. Backed by silver and gold. The Populist Party was a coalition of alliance members, farmers, labor leaders, and reformers that influenced politicians. They called for bank regulation, government ownership of railroads, and free coinage of silver. This would be to make coins, okay? They kind of wanted everything to have somebody watching over it, okay? We had a presidential election in 1896. This is McKinley versus Jennings Bryan. Silver and gold was the major dispute. McKinley, he was on the side of gold. He won. During this time, there was a lot of segregation and discrimination. The big thing was a literacy test. So again, how well can you read or write? And we're not too far out of the Civil War at this time. So there's a lot of men and women who are freedmen. They were former slaves, and unfortunately, those slaves did not get to go to school. So a lot of them didn't know how to read and write unless somebody in their family happened to know, or they just happened to pick it up on their own. So if they're requiring a literacy test and a poll tax for African Americans to vote, a lot of people couldn't do it. They couldn't pass the reading test, or they didn't have the money to vote. Okay, now that is illegal. They can't require anybody to do that. But back then, this was common practice. The Jim Crow laws created and enforced segregation in public places. Okay, so they had black water fountains and white water fountains. Jim Crow law said they could do that. Louisiana adopted the separate rail cars for African Americans in the 1890s. So on a train, they had one car that was for white people and one car that was for black people. The Plessy versus Ferguson, this said that African Americans and white Americans had separate but equal rights. So if you had a railroad car for white people, you had to have one for black people. If you had white bathrooms, you had to have black bathrooms. That was what the law stated in Plessy versus Ferguson. And I know somebody's going, Miss Staples, I don't have enough room. Make it work. Okay, and the final one, this is one of your vocab words that you did on Wednesday. Lynching, murder of an individual by a group or mob. I have to look how to spell it every single time. Okay, so some of them were hanged by trees, on trees, things like that. If this era of history interests you, sometime go to YouTube, not right now, go to YouTube, and there are all kinds of like songs and stuff that talk about what life was like during this time. Okay? You're almost done, just a tiny bit more. Last bit. Booker T. Washington, he was an important man in history. He believed that African Americans had to accept segregation. He's like, look, we're just going to have to deal with this. It's not worth it. But W.E.B. Du Bois believed that African Americans should strive for equal rights. African Americans were not the only groups who faced discriminations at this time. Hispanic Americans were not treated very nicely either. Most of them were farmers, but many of them had to take jobs that offered very little pay and really couldn't leave those jobs until their debts were paid. So like, let's say they bought a house from somebody. They could not leave that job, even if they found a better paying one, until they completely paid off that house by working for that person. Okay, so these people are working for like literally for pennies to pay off their debt. So it took a long time. It took their whole lifetime to pay off those debts. The next one were Asian Americans. This is tenants wouldn't rent to Asian tenants. And in the early 1900s, it was illegal for a white person to marry somebody of Asian descent. Okay? Insane to think about that. And then Native Americans still faced a lot of discrimination. They were forced on reservations and had few economic opportunities. Many of them did not have citizenship until 1924. Insane to think about that. These reservations is an area of land where they forced them to live. So they came, kicked them off of the land that they were on, made them go live in somewhere new that wasn't always a nice area to live, and they forced them to live there. Okay, so we know a lot of groups face discrimination from different people. Obviously, African Americans face a lot of discrimination, slavery all the way through segregation. Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, Native Americans face a lot of discrimination. We talked earlier about immigrants who came to our country from other countries. Irish immigrants face discrimination. Italian immigrants face discrimination. German immigrants. Okay, so every new group has faced some sort of discrimination. Okay. All right, what I want you to do is I want you to write a 1 to 2 sentence summary about what we talked about today. And then you're going to go ahead and get out the chapter 5.3 assignment. It should be the next page in your notes. And you've got the rest of the class to work on that. Okay, hope you guys are good for Mrs. Bullock. I will see you on Tuesday. On Monday, you will have a review assignment that you're going to do for chapter 5, and we're going to count that as a quiz grade. Then on Tuesday, we're going to start reading our novel. Okay, so be good, and I'll see you on Tuesday.